Hey guys, it's Chris
and Nat.
Welcome back to our channel.
Okay, so we're huge American Horror Story fans, and if you don't know what that is, it's a horror show that comes out every year around October. So we like that it looks at history and true crime for a lot of its content.
So we started a little mini series for you guys where we're gonna kind of go more in depth in each season, picking different characters who are based on true crime events and historical figures, and just kind of give you a better look into their story.
We're going to be talking about the nurse murders in season 1, which was Murder House. It's in episode 2. So just to set the scene for you, this is when a man knocked on the door of a house occupied by nurses. He said that he needed help, so the nurse let him in to help him to clean his wound. And as she's cleaning his wound, she realizes that there is no wound, and he attacks both the nurses and stabs them to death.
Don't get smart! It will only make it worse.
So Ryan Murphy actually said that this scene was inspired by the Richard Speck massacre of 1966. Richard Speck was born in Kirkwood, Illinois. He was the second youngest out of 7 children, and he was really close to all of his siblings and his mom, but tragedy struck when he was just 6 years old. His father actually died, as well as his brother, and that really changed his life. So a few years after his father's death, Richard's mother actually remarried a man named Carl Lindsberg, I believe. It's funny because they were both opposites to each other. Richard's mother was very religious, and the stepfather was a chronic alcoholic. He drank all the time.
And his mother didn't drink at all.
No.
I don't think. Yeah.
So that's kind of weird that they...
So Richard started picking up his stepfather's habits and started drinking when he was only 12 years old. So Richard didn't do very well in school. He actually failed the 8th grade because he didn't like speaking in class, because he didn't like people looking at him. And he actually ended up dropping out of school at the age of 16 after failing every subject in the 9th grade.
Including art. He failed art. Okay? How do you fail art? When Richard was 20, he started dating a 15-year-old girl named, what was her name? Shirley
Annette
Malone. And she got pregnant only after 3 weeks of them dating.
Their marriage didn't seem to be the best. She often lived in fear of him. He would rape her at night point and demand sex 4 to 5 times a day, according to her. So by the time he was 24, he was already arrested 41 times for things like assault. He was even thought to have killed a man. So he was definitely no stranger to crime.
In 1965, Speck attacked a woman in her apartment parking lot with a knife, and he fled the scene after she started screaming. The police caught him, and he was sentenced to only 16 months. But only 6 months into his sentence, there was an error, I don't know, and he was released.
And then in 1966, just a year later, after he was released, he actually stabbed a man with a knife in a lounge, and his mother hired a defense attorney and was somehow able to get the charge reduced from aggravated assault to disturbing the peace, which I think is insane.
How does that even work?
Someone.
How does that even work?
Seriously. And he was only fined $10 and jailed for 3 days when he failed to pay the fine.
$10.
So on July 13th, 1966, Richard Speck spent the entire day drinking, and then he forced a 53-year-old woman to his room that he was renting and raped her and stole her handgun. He then left, went to a bar to drink more, got into another altercation, and after that he was just left walking the streets.
So at 11 p.m. that same day, Richard broke into a townhouse that was functioning as a dormitory for nurses, and using only a knife, he attacked 8 nurses and raped one of them. The nurses were
Gloria Davy, Patricia Matusek, Nina Jo Schmiel, Pamela Wilkening, Suzanne Ferris, Marianne Jordan, Merlita Gargullo, and Valentina Pasion. So Richard held 6 of the women in a room, and he tied their hands with like scraps of bed sheets, and one by one he started leading them out of the rooms to stab or strangle them to death. 3 of the girls weren't there yet. They arrived in the midst of all the chaos,
For the last 3 nurses who came in later into the chaos that was happening, one of them was stabbed in the upstairs hallway, another one was stabbed as she was walking into the house, and then the last one was raped and murdered.
One nurse, however, was the only survivor. Her name was Corazon Amurao, and she was able to actually hide during the murders while Richard was turning his back because he was leading the nurses out of the rooms. She was able to roll herself under the bed, and she stayed there well after Richard left, so till around 6 a.m. the next morning, just to make sure that he was really gone. And it's assumed that he either lost count of the nurses or he was unaware of the total amount living there. That's why he didn't really look for her. And he was also presumed to be drunk, so he didn't really know how many nurses he had killed or how many were there. So she was able to hide and survive the night.
So she later said that the American girls told her more or less that they had to trust him, and they thought maybe if they were calm and quiet that they would just let them go because he seemed to be calm enough, and then that was a good sign.
Yeah, so
but
probably didn't think that he was going to murder them.
No, yeah. She actually said that none of her friends were actually screaming while they left the room, but that she heard muffled screams later on after they were already taken out.
So 2 days after the murder, Richard was actually identified by a man named Claude Lunsford. They were actually drinking together when he saw a sketch of Richard in the paper. So he called the police, but the police never really followed up, so nothing ever happened with that. And then afterwards, Richard attempted suicide the same night at the Star Hotel. And a desk clerk from the hotel called the emergency room, so he was taken to the hospital, and one of the doctors, Dr. Leroy Smith, actually did recognize him from the papers, so that's when the police showed up and he was finally arrested. So Richard claims he had no recollection of the night of the murders, but then he did confess to Dr. Smith while at the hospital that he actually did it, and he was both drunk and high during the murders.
So Richard's trial began April 3rd of 1967, and he was positively identified by the surviving nurse, Corazon, and she actually rose from the witness box and walked over to him, nearly almost touching him, and said, "This is the man." And it only took 49 minutes for the jury to deliberate and decide that he was guilty, and he was recommended for the death penalty. On June 29th, 1972, the death penalty was actually ruled unconstitutional in Illinois. Richard was resentenced to 400 to 1,000 plus years in prison, and he would spend the rest of his life in prison until he died of a heart attack.
December 5th, 1991, of a heart attack.
So the second person we're going to be talking about is Dr. Charles Montgomery, who is also in season 1 Murder House, and he's first introduced to us in episode 3, and throughout the season he's regarded as the surgeon to the stars. And this particular scene is set in 1922, where Charles is seen in his house, and he practices medicine in his basement, and he develops this Frankenstein-like complex where you see him sewing and adding different body parts to different animals
to keep up with their lifestyle, because they were very rich in the show. Dr. Montgomery and his wife Nora would perform illegal abortions in their basement to young girls who wanted to make it big on the silver screen, so they didn't want to have babies. And then a couple of the girls operated by him, however, did not make it out alive.
So although Ryan Murphy never came out and stated so, it's rumored that Charles Montgomery is based off of George Hodel Jr., who was one of the main murder suspects in one of the biggest cases ever in American history, the Black Dahlia.
So by the 1940s, George had a very successful medical practice in Los Angeles. He was actually a polygamist. He had 2 wives, both of them's name were Dorothy. And on top of that, he had multiple affairs. And then in January of 1947, the body of Elizabeth Short, which is the Black Dahlia, was found. Hundreds of suspects were taken in for questioning, one of which was George, and he came under suspicion because his daughter came out, Tamar, and she accused him of sexually assaulting her and impregnating her.
George was also accused of killing his secretary, Ruth Spalding. He was never charged for that or the situation with his daughter, but the police still considered him a valuable suspect in the case of the Black Dahlia.
Okay, so the Black Dahlia was found murdered in Lament Park, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. Her case became highly publicized because of the graphic nature of the crime. So she was found naked and mutilated, and her body was cut in half at her waist. Her body was drained entirely of blood, and her face had been slashed from the corner of her mouth to her ear, which they call a Glasgow smile.
Mm-hmm.
And she also had cuts on her thighs and breasts, and like I said, her body was cut in half, and her lower body was found a foot away from her upper body, and she was posed with her hands over her head, her elbows kind of bent, and her legs spread apart. So it was a very gruesome scene for the mother and daughter who discovered her body. They at first actually thought that she was a mannequin.
It's interesting the way that she was posed.
Yeah.
Like, why?
But yeah, it's crazy. And just the fact that it was so, like, in a public field.
Yeah. Like,
and
they wanted to find her body.
Yeah.
They wanted people to see, which is like,
the craziest
oh my
thing.
gosh.
And just the fact that they've never even really found the murderer.
Nope.
And, like, this was so public and so out there. It's just crazy. So Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, was 22 when she was killed. She was born in Massachusetts and moved around until she moved around a lot until she moved to California because she wanted to become an actress.
And the night before her death, she actually was dropped off at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, California by a man named Robert, who's actually married, but they were dating. Scandalous. And she was supposed to meet with her sister, who was coming in from Boston, at the hotel. And the last time Elizabeth was seen was at the Crown Grill Club Lounge, which was only 1 mile away from the hotel she was staying at.
And it was back in the day, so none of the hotels had like cameras. Like there was nothing like that, so there was no way to pinpoint where she was or like check on any of that. So like, who knows where she actually was? This is just like kind of
allegedly
yeah,
the last time she was seen. So based on the way the body was found, they believe that it was somebody who had medical experience, just on how the cuts were, and there was very little bruising on the body, which suggests that they did it after she died.
It wasn't like an amateur who cut her. Like they were
No.
sure that it was somebody who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it was like a radical surgery.
So no one was ever convicted for her death, not George, not anybody, and they had hundreds of suspects throughout this case. Like, so many people were taken in for questioning, but nothing ever really came of it.
And so I'm sure if it was now, they probably would have caught the person, but DNA wasn't really like a thing, so
techniques get better over time.
So they never convicted anyone, which is super sad for her family. They were never able to get closure on that. And
Steve Hodel, the son of George, actually to this day still believes that his father was involved and was the murderer of the Black Dahlia. And he has a couple of books he actually wrote himself on why he believes it. He thinks he has facts and data to prove that. But not only that, he also thinks his dad is linked to the Zodiac killer, which is so cool to think about. Like,
that's insane.
That's
Could you
really
imagine
cool.
like, and there's obviously been so many conspiracies about who the Zodiac killer is too. We obviously don't know who it is. Alright guys, so that's it for today.
We've always really loved American Horror Story, and specifically because Ryan Murphy uses real events, true crime, and history into his series, which is really cool because we obviously have an interest for it, so we love that he does that.
So this is going to become like an ongoing series, and we'll talk about each season, and just let us know what you want us to talk about. If there's anything specific in any of the seasons that you want us to talk about, you can let us know. You could comment down below or follow us on Instagram at Cynical Soulmates, and you could let us know on there.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in our next video and our next vlog coming out very soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.